All right, let's jump right into a huge question, maybe one of the biggest. What actually separates something that's alive from something that's not? I mean, we're surrounded by this incredible, buzzing world of life, but how do we even begin to make sense of it all? To get to the bottom of this, we're going to have to challenge a few things you might think you know. So, to kick things off, here's a little puzzle for you. Think about a cloud. It grows, right? It moves across the sky, it changes shape. Or what about a crystal? You give it the right conditions and it grows too. So, are they alive? It sounds like a simple enough question, but wow, does it mess with our basic ideas of what life even is? And that leads us straight into our first big topic. What does it actually mean to be alive? We're going to take a hard look at the usual suspects, things like growth and reproduction, and really see if they're the true defining lines that separate, say, a tiny bacterium from a giant boulder. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about growth. Sure, living things grow, we all know that. But here's the key. It's growth from the inside. It happens through cells dividing and making more of themselves. Now, that crystal or that cloud, they grow from the outside, just by piling more stuff onto their surface. And that right there is a huge difference. So just seeing something grow isn't enough to call it alive, not by a long shot. All right, so if growth is a shaky clue, what about reproduction? Making more of your own kind. That has to be it, right? Well, not quite. Think about it. A mule is definitely alive, but it can't reproduce. Same for worker bees. Or what about people who can't have children? They are absolutely 100% alive. So even though reproduction is super important for a species to survive, it's not a foolproof rule for defining a single living thing. So if we can't rely on growth or reproduction, what are the real, non-negotiable rules for being alive? Well, biologists have pretty much agreed on these three big ones. First up, metabolism. That's just the fancy word for all the chemical reactions constantly happening inside an organism to keep it running. Second, cellular organization. This is a biggie. Every single living thing is made of at least one cell, no exceptions. And third, consciousness. This is the ability to sense what's going on around you and react to it. You put those three together, that's life. Okay, so now we know what life is, but that brings us to our next giant puzzle. How on earth do we organize it all? I mean, the sheer variety of life is just staggering. It's like walking into the biggest library in the universe, but all the books, millions of them, are just thrown in a giant pile on the floor. That's kind of the problem biologists were facing. And just to give you an idea of how big that pile of books is, get this. Scientists have named and described about 1.8 times million different species so far. And listen, that's just the stuff we found. The real number is probably way, way bigger. You can imagine with that many species, it would be total chaos without some kind of organizational system. And the solution to all that chaos has a name: taxonomy. It's the science of how we identify, classify, and crucially, name organisms. It's basically the card catalog system for that great library of life we were talking about. It's how we create order from all that beautiful biological chaos. So how does this whole system actually work? Well, it all starts with a name. You can't file something away until you know what to call it, right? And you need a name that everyone everywhere agrees on. That's where this brilliant idea called binomial nomenclature comes into play. Okay, the system itself, which we owe to a guy named Carl Linnaeus, is actually super simple but so powerful. Here's how it works. Every single species gets a two-part name. Think of it like a first and last name. The first name is the genus, and you always capitalize it. The second name is the species, and it's always lowercase. That's it. Oh, and sometimes you'll see the name of the scientist who discovered it at the end. Let's look at some examples, because this makes it super clear. We, modern humans, are Homo sapiens. A mango tree is Mangifera indica, and look, you can see Lin right there for Linnaeus. A tiger is Panthera tigris. The beauty of this is that a scientist in Japan and a scientist in Brazil can say Panthera tigris, and they both know, without a doubt, they're talking about the exact same animal, no confusion. It's a universal language. But a name is just the start. The real magic of taxonomy is how it organizes everything into this massive, nested system, like a giant family tree for every living thing on the planet. So let's dive into these levels of classification, and we're going to go from the biggest, most general groups all the way down to the super specific. All right, at the very top, the biggest category of all, you've got the kingdom. This is super broad. Think kingdom Animalia, which is every animal, from a jellyfish to an elephant, or kingdom Plantae for all the plants. Now, let's zoom in a level to phylum. This groups things with a similar basic body plan. So inside the animal kingdom, all of us with a backbone, fish, reptiles, us, we're all in the phylum Chordata. Zooming in again, we hit class. It gets more specific. Within Chordata, you've got the class Mammalia. That's where all the warm-blooded critters that have hair and feed their babies milk. And we keep going. Next up is order. This groups similar families together. So within mammals, we have the order Primata. That's monkeys, apes, and us humans. Getting closer now, we have the family. For us, that's the family Hominidae, which includes us and the other great apes. Now we're getting really specific. The genus is a group of super closely related species. Our genus is Homo, which includes us and our extinct relatives like Neanderthals. And finally, we land on the most fundamental level of all, the species. This is a group of individuals that can, breed with each other and have fertile babies. For us, that's Homo sapiens. And boom, here it is all laid out in one chart. This is so cool. You can follow the path for a human, a housefly, a mango, and wheat, all the way from the top, kingdom, down to the bottom, species. You can see where our paths cross and where they split. It's just such a clean, logical system for mapping out the relationships between every living thing. Okay, so for our last section, let's talk about the how. How do scientists actually do this? What's in their toolkit for studying and classifying these millions and millions of species? This chart breaks it down perfectly. You've got herbaria, which are basically libraries of pressed, dried plants, so for studying dead specimens. Then you have botanical gardens, which are the opposite, collections of living plants for reference. Museums are kind of like herbaria, but for both plants and animals. And zoological parks, zoos, are where we can study live animals in protected places. And then there's this really neat tool called a key. It's not a place, but an analytical guide. It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure book for biology that helps a scientist figure out what an unknown organism is by answering a series of questions about its features. And this brings us right back to where we started. Remember we said consciousness, just being able to sense your environment, is a key part of being alive? Well, here's a fascinating final thought on that. Humans seem to be the only ones with self-consciousness. It's not just about sensing the world. It's about being aware that you are the one sensing it. It's that awareness of your own existence, which is a pretty wild thought that really sets us apart. So really, the big takeaway here is that this great library of life is still under construction. We've got 1.8 million species on the shelves, but there are millions more out there waiting to be discovered. In the deepest oceans, the thickest jungles, maybe even in your own backyard. The job is nowhere near done. And that leaves us with one last, really exciting question to think about. What amazing, undiscovered new branches are we going to add to this incredible